Welcome today to the Live Greater podcast. I have Taylor Ann Macey with me today. I am so excited for our conversation. Welcome, Taylor. Ann.
Ooh, yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So can you tell the audience a little bit about you?
Yes, so my name is Taylor Ann Macey. I am a life coach and a nutrition coach for women with autoimmune conditions. I myself have a rare and aggressive one and am really passionate about using nutrition to feel your best and also to take care of your mental health when it's out of your hands, as autoimmune conditions are. You can't solve for them with diet. You can't cure them with exercise. There are things you can do to help yourself, but learning how to balance both of those things is really important to me and something that I help my clients do. I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. I've got 2 kids, and that's me. I love jigsaw puzzles, if you want a random fact. But yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So you have 2 kids. Are they young kids? You look like you'd be a young mom.
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And yeah, I had 23 and 25 was how old I was when I had them. So
Okay.
young-ish, I guess, depending.
Yeah. So that made me, I question that because with the autoimmune disease and little kids are very busy. So how does that come into play for you?
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. So I was diagnosed with my condition. It's called neuromyelitis optica, or NMO. And I was diagnosed in 2019 when my son was 2 and my daughter was 7 or 8 months old.
Okay.
And I essentially was a previously healthy person by all general accounts, and woke up one morning and my vision was completely wrong. I
Oh,
couldn't sit up. I tried to stand up and get out of bed and couldn't balance. I couldn't stand up straight without falling over. I couldn't even keep my eyes open. It was so uncomfortable and I couldn't see clearly. And so I had kind of a really rapid sequence of appointments. Obviously, it was really alarming and scary. And
yeah.
I got this diagnosis. Luckily, I was able to get into the right people in the right time frame and was able to get a diagnosis relatively quickly. And I remember one of the things that they do in cases like this that can be relatively common with conditions like these is they will put you on IV steroids, and you'll have like a 3-day round of steroids just to manage whatever the event is that's happening. And in my case, it was something visual. And I remember,
Does that help with just inflammation a lot, or the IV?
yes, it's just meant to be like a overall calm down of the nervous system.
Okay.
At least in my case, it was. I think it is. Steroids generally are trying to just calm inflammation in a variety of different locations, depending on the symptom, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so when, at least in my condition and in other demyelinating conditions, they're called events or relapses, where you have these flares. And sometimes, typically, the first round of defense in these cases are steroids. And in my case, this was a 3-day round of IV steroids. And I remember I had my 8-month-old, and home hospice was on their way to the house to, get me all set up to the IV. And I was breastfeeding my daughter at the table. And I had planned to breastfeed her for a year, and you can't be on these steroids and breastfeed at the same time. And I could have reasonably probably pumped and dumped those throughout the course of those steroids for those 3 days, but
Mm-hmm.
there was just so much going on, and we just had kind of made this decision with everything that was happening. We just said, I think we just need to be done breastfeeding. And so I remember sitting at the table breastfeeding her and just being like, this is the last time I'm going to get to do this. And it was so heartbreaking because
Yeah.
I loved breastfeeding my children. It came easily to me. I know it can be a really difficult thing for a lot of women. And luckily it was a relatively easy process for me. And I loved doing it and was so grateful that I was able to do it for both my kids. And so to be sitting at this table and, breastfeeding her for the last time, knowing I was getting hooked up to this IV for these steroids. And, it was just a whole overwhelming experience. And you just asked about kids and their ages. This is probably more than you need to know, but
No, but I mean, yeah, to think about that, that would be very emotional. Your life is about to
yeah.
extremely change, or it is changing and out of your control already.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just, in those first couple of weeks of all of it, it was just so much of everything, so much grief, so much fear, also so much love. You know, people in my life were so supportive. I was so lucky. But it was a huge factor in all of this was my children and how it might affect their future, how it ended up affecting like our ability to have more children. And so it's definitely a very interesting component to the dynamic of my life of living with a condition like this, and also having
Yeah.
very young children that, especially at that time, really needed me all the time. You know what I mean? And they're a little bit older to where there's a little bit more independence, but still they're very much in need of mom and dad most of the time. And so it
Yeah.
has gotten a little bit easier, but it's been a dance. It's been a really interesting experience trying to figure that all out. And also, you know, having to explain to them as they've gotten older when I'm going through certain things and going in for infusions and things. And so it's a very interesting element to all of to the picture of an autoimmune disease as a whole.
Wow. That would be very difficult, especially just these other people that are dependent on you, and then you needing to turn to your own needs a lot, I'm sure. And so can you explain the disease a little bit for us to understand more what is going on with that
Yeah.
disease?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, it's called neuromyelitis optica, and it's relatively rare. And I have over the years connected with a significant amount of women that have it, but it's not something that you hear very often. It is a demyelinating condition that where the immune system attacks the brain, the spinal cord, and the optic nerve, and so it causes blindness and paralysis. And without treatment, typically prognosis is somewhere in the realm of like 3 to 5 years. It's really deadly. And at the time I was diagnosed, I believe there was only one, maybe two approved therapies um, for this condition. And since then, the whole landscape of the condition has changed a great deal. And I believe there are, I want to say 5 or 6 therapies on the market now that are available to patients with this condition.
That's good.
But the therapy that I began in 2019 when I was diagnosed, and that I'm still on to this day, is a chemotherapy drug. So it's a like 7 to 8 hour infusion that I do multiple times a year. And these therapies don't cure the condition. They simply prolong the time between these flares, between relapses, between events. And so unfortunately, it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, I have a symptom, I can take this drug and feel better. Symptoms still happen. The disease still exists within my body, but it's just a matter of keeping it at bay, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Other therapies for the condition are similar. They work a little bit differently depending on the person and their needs and their current symptoms. But yeah, it falls into the category of those autoimmune demyelinating conditions. It's been referred to as a distant cousin disease of MS. It's much more severe, much more aggressive, but based on most people's knowledge of autoimmune conditions, that's like the best comparison to make that most people have heard of or have some knowledge of.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing. I mean, for you having to, you
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, but it's wonderful that you're still here. You're such a beautiful person. And just looking at you, I wouldn't know that you had a disease, this debilitating disease. And I've heard that a lot with people with immune diseases, that, people don't realize what's going on in their life because they look fine most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really interesting thing in the autoimmune community. There is this idea of it being an invisible illness because oftentimes they aren't like a broken bone that you can visually see that
Mm-hmm.
someone is dealing with. And so it is an interesting part of being in this community and having the condition that I do is it's not something that you can just see by looking at a person. But one thing that I've learned, because I get that comment relatively often, is like, you just would never know. And what I have really learned, especially just in my business and learning from other people, is that that is true for every person. It's true for people with autoimmune conditions, of course, is it's not something you immediately see, but no matter who you're talking to, you never know what they're going through. You
Yeah.
can never look at a person and know what trials they are facing, what, turmoil they are experiencing today in this moment. And so for me, it's been a great lesson. I hope I wasn't, supremely judgmental before, but I know that I've certainly been humbled since this condition, and just being able to look at a person and realizing that I don't know what they're going through. And it makes it easier for sure to just give people the benefit of the doubt, to be
Yeah.
like, you just never know. And you can't blame someone for a single moment or judge them off a single moment, because there's always so much below the surface that we just don't understand.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you mentioned earlier about that nutrition and exercise, all these things can't cure it, but it does help, right? So how does that come into play for you with, you've had this schooling of nutrition. Did you do that before?
I did.
Okay.
Yes. And it was really interesting because my undergrad was in exercise and wellness nutrition. And so I studied a great deal of just basic nutrition and elements of that field. And I was already involved in that field. I was working as a life coach at the time already, working with women and helping them lose weight. And so it was a really interesting moment for me to have this diagnosis, because one of my passions, for a long time has been how to optimize health, how to manipulate the body through what you're eating, through how you're moving. And the keyword there being optimize, right? Based on what you're eating, you can optimize how you're feeling, how you're functioning, how you're performing. And so it was always something that I just had so much interest in. It was just so cool that we have things available to us that we can utilize in order to change our bodies or to feel better. And so I was already implementing a lot of what I already knew with myself, with my clients. And so to have this condition, it was a really great reminder that, yes, there's so much we can do with how we're feeling. And that's what I'm passionate about teaching, is how can we utilize nutrition and movement as a way to help ourselves and give ourselves every advantage possible. But then this whole diagnosis story for me just reminded me of how little control I do have. And so that was where, my training in mental health and as a life coach really came in marrying the two, of saying, okay, here's what I can do. I was a healthy person. I did all the quote unquote right things, if you will.
Mhm.
And I still was, gifted with this rare condition. And so how can I use what I know to help myself where possible when it comes to nutrition and movement? And how can I take care of myself mentally when there is still so much that's out of my control, right? And so generally speaking, I use nutrition to help myself have energy, to help my cells repair, right? When you have an autoimmune condition, it's attacking your own system. So if we have inflammation and things in our body, you can use nutrition to help yourself. It doesn't cure the disease, but it does give you an advantage against it, right?
Right.
But then there were still things that have come up for me over the years, symptoms and things. And so in those moments, that's where I've really just had to hone in on the thoughts that I'm thinking every second of the day, and making sure that I am exercising exquisite self-care with that internal dialogue, because at a point, that's all I have control over. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think I have more control. I'm like, no, I can manipulate this more than I actually can. And so that's where it's like, it's so important to be mindful of the dialogue and the narrative and all of the sentences in your mind that can compound a lot of the physical pain that you're already in with, or symptoms that you're already experiencing with autoimmune conditions. That when you can be so careful with your mental health in addition to the physical health, I think that's what makes it, at least for me, that's what makes it manageable. So I'm saying I'm going to do all I can to take care of myself with what I know. And then when that stops and there is still this element that I can't control, I'm going to be so on top of how I take care of my mind, how I manage my emotions, make sure I'm really deliberate with it all. And so it's a multifaceted approach to wellness. And that's something that I love to teach other women that might be in similar situations to mine.
I think that's perfect. The multifaceted, because our mind, our spirit, and our body, they're all one. So if you're just working on one, you're still going to be depleted, because they're all whole. They have to work together. And so what are some things that you do for your mindset and having that mental health for you? Because I mean, that would be a struggle. And do you know, before you get to that, do you know when things are coming on? Can you tell when you're going to have an event or the episode or?
Um, I wouldn't say there's like a sixth sense that I experience where I'm like, oh, something's coming, but I do know that there are certain behaviors that can aggravate symptoms. For example, if
Okay.
my sleep quality suffers, if I'm not getting adequate sleep, or if it's really disrupted over a period of time, that really can contribute to potential flares and symptoms that are more aggravated than otherwise they might be without bad sleep. But so sleep is one, hydration is another, stress is something that can definitely contribute to those flares happening. And so I just have kind of learned for my particular body what types of things that I need to pay attention to. And a lot of these things are pretty universal. Things like sleep are really important, especially for autoimmune conditions, just to help the body stay in as like a baseline unirritated state as possible. And then depending on the autoimmune condition, obviously, because there are many, there are different things that can aggravate different people. Some people might have like responses to heat, extreme heat or extreme cold. Sometimes that can be an issue, or, different types of environmental factors that can contribute that maybe I don't have the same response to. So that's something that I have to be really mindful of, is just that self-care and being like, okay, I know that sleep matters, hydration, moving my body, those things will help me prevent flares. Again, I will still probably have them, and that's where the mental part comes in.
Mhm.
Um, and it is kind of a trial and error process. Is
Okay.
everybody's unique in figuring out what types of things might be aggravating a condition. It's kind of a trial and error thing. In regard to the taking care of the mental health, I think my first strategy is to simply be with the emotions that come up. What was really interesting for me is in the beginning of all of it, I was having very intense emotions of fear and overwhelm and grief and um, concern and sadness and, the whole spectrum of these types of negative emotions.
Naturally. I mean,
Right, right. And I had a lot of comments from very well-intended people who would say things like, you know, you're going to beat this, everything's going to be okay, intended with a positive idea to be like,
Mhm.
hey, this is going to be okay. And I had to take a step back from trying to believe it was going to be okay and just allow myself to be sad, to be devastated, to be afraid, to not judge myself for feeling that way, and to not talk myself out of feeling those things. And to just allow myself to be with it for a little while, recognizing that these emotions weren't going to be this powerful and this present forever, but I could still just spend as much time with them as I needed to. And so when it comes to autoimmune conditions, because it's chronic and typically lifetime, depending on the condition, but usually it's chronic.
Mhm.
Um, when we have events or symptoms, typically we tend to have emotions and responses like this. And so one of the ways that I think it's so important to approach the mental health aspect is just to allow that to be there without judging yourself for feeling that way, and knowing that people might try to talk you out of it, might try to, and not with any malintent, of course, but people just like to try and be positive, and that's totally fine. But just to give yourself permission to be with those things and to allow them to be there, and know that nothing is wrong because you feel those things, and that yes, everything might be okay, and you don't have to believe that right now. It is an option to believe, but if it's so
Mhm.
far out of reach from believing that, then don't try to push yourself there. Just to meet yourself where you are when it comes to your emotional state as it relates to these chronic conditions. So that's the first line of defense.
Yeah, that's good because I think, just as you were talking, it made me think of grieving. I just had a friend, they lost their father, and it's just like you have to go through the process as part of the healing process. And it probably helps your body to just accept and be able to keep moving on, right? To have that ability to accept all those emotions. I think that's important for everyone in any position that they're in. So I
100%.
love that. Yeah. After you receive the news of what is going on and they did it take a while for them to understand, or within those first few days or whatever, did you know what was going on?
That's a good question. And this is actually can be relatively common in the autoimmune community. After I had had some scans and gone to a general specialist, which is kind of contradictory, but it was just the next step, I guess.
Uh-huh.
They had referred me to a different specialist, and I wasn't able to get in for months. I think it was like 8 months after
Oh,
I
wow.
had had all these scans. And it was actually a dear friend of mine who said, "Hey, I'm interning for a neurologist. Why don't you give me the scans? I'll take them to him and he can give you his input." And he called me and he said, "Can you come tomorrow morning before the office even opens?"
Wow.
And uh, so it was actually my husband's birthday that day, and we went and got this diagnosis. And I think that for me, this is one of the areas where I am so lucky, is because a condition like this, like I mentioned, is really aggressive. And so even 8 months, who knows, right? We don't know, but it
Mhm.
could have been a lot more dire than it ended up being with the nature of the condition. And so I was really lucky in that I was able to get into him and get into treatment relatively quickly. That can often be a very key part to overall health, is just early diagnosis. And unfortunately, it's something that can be more or less out of our control. And so that's why it's important to, make sure you're supporting yourself mentally through this process. If oftentimes finding a diagnosis can be difficult. So I was able to get into where I needed to be relatively quickly. And, you know, that was a huge help for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, to get those answers and
Yeah.
just probably direction of what you needed to do to maybe help the situation. And what a blessing. I mean, 8 months, that's a long time that you would have had to
Mm.
wait. Yeah.
Yeah. For a condition that can kill you in a couple years. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Who's to say? We don't know, but I still feel incredibly blessed to have had that path the way that it ended up coming together.
So take us through your situations now that it's been a little while since you've been dealing with this autoimmune disease and working with it and having this your family and all the things that you have to work with.
So it's always an interesting experience because it seems like with every step of this process, if you will, we kind of get to a new normal and we're like, oh, okay, this is our new normal. We're okay. We can figure this out. And then something else happens and we just are forced to find our new normal again. And I think that in a way, it's a really beautiful process because it's challenged us in ways that I think have really allowed us to grow. And it's not something that you would ever want for yourself or anyone that you loved, but it's been really humbling in retrospect to look back at the experience and see how powerful it was for our relationships, for, specifically my husband and my marriage, and how it's deepened our friendship and our love. And not even in spite of the huge negative emotions, I think it's been because of that,
Mhm.
because of those challenges and all those extreme situations. It's really provided an opportunity for us to grow closer together. In regard to how we approach things, like I mentioned, with every element to this, the first step is just, okay, here's what I'm feeling. I'm just going to be here for a minute. I'm not going to try and change this. I'm not going to try and be positive about this. I'm not going to try and talk myself out of what I'm feeling. And then as I kind of move through whatever might be present for me in that time, I feel like there comes these moments where I then can see an opportunity to maybe shift my thinking a little bit. And what I mean by that is I have the grief, I have the sadness. And then sometimes these thoughts sneak in of like, I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to live the life that I want to live. These thoughts that are valid, right? But so painful to believe.
Yeah.
And so in moments like this, and this is something that I do with my clients as well, is it's not a matter of trying to talk yourself out of how you're thinking in order to like help yourself feel better, in order to be positive about a situation, but instead it's about saying, hey, when you think this way, it simply adds more pain to your life. And we're not going to blame you for feeling that way, but for your own sake, let's see if we can just shift the narrative just a little bit. If we can just shift those sentences in your mind just a little bit to give you any type of relief that you can come by, especially with chronic illness and you have things like pain, chronic pain every single day.
Mhm.
It's it can be so difficult. And so then when you have the mentality on top of it, um, that's a little bit more within your control, it can be so helpful to examine what you're thinking about your body and just see if there's any wiggle room to shift it even just a little bit, instead of like, I'm never going to live the life I want to live, just to be able to say, I can be okay for the next 5 minutes. I'm going to be okay for the next hour. I can get through today. My body knows what to do. I'm going to figure this out, right? When we can just shift it a little bit to just still being believable, but isn't trying to be like overly positive about something that maybe we want to be upset about. That's always my approach when it comes to symptoms, injuries, chronic illness, is just saying, where do we have some wiggle room with how you're thinking that we can capitalize on, simply for your own sake, not because you should or because anyone expects it of you, but just to help you in any way that you can.
Yeah. Wow. What a amazing position that you're in. I mean, you're dealing with this autoimmune disease yourself and then able to aid other people. Does that help you as well in being able to help others just to overcome even mentally?
Yeah, there is absolutely a level of empathy that I am so blessed to have. And it's one of those things with this diagnosis that at the time felt like the worst possible thing, but it has been such a blessing over the last 3.5 years to see how it's connected me with people that I would never have otherwise connected with, and how it's given me the opportunity to grieve and to find community. And I don't want to put myself on a pedestal by saying like I've helped so many people, but I hope that I have. I hope that I
Right.
have been able to offer something to people that might be in a similar situation to mine. And without that, I don't know that I would have made these connections and friendships and relationships and found um, this very unique connection that you have with someone that has a similar story, a similar condition.
Mhm.
You wouldn't have that otherwise. You don't connect with people in the same way unless there is something that connects you, right? And so
Yeah.
a condition like this or chronic illness, while you would never wish it on anybody, it is a very powerful emotional connection point, and that can bring about really, really beautiful things.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your coaching? I want to switch gears just a little bit and this
Yeah.
how you help them. You help them mentally and you also do the nutritional part with them as well, right?
Yes. So I still am very passionate about nutrition, and helping women lose weight, helping women lose fat, if that is something that they are interested in. I know that there's always kind of a pendulum swinging back and forth in diet culture of like, you should want to lose weight, all the way to like, you should not want to lose weight, and so it's always kind of a dance. But I love helping to empower women to know how to use nutrition and movement to their advantage, whether that means weight loss or fat loss, or whether it just means helping yourself feel better day to day. And
Mhm.
so within my practice, I take women through individualized and specific programs based on their goals, right? If fat loss is the goal or just overall wellness is the goal, where we meet them where we are and just emphasize nutrition and different lifestyle elements that can help them align with what they want to accomplish for themselves. And then, of course, that is a lot of basic, straightforward information, if you will, just learning basic principles of nutrition and health. And much more of the work is learning these mental skills, is
Mhm.
learning how to nourish your mind in the same way that we are working to nourish your body. And just as we go to the gym every day and exercise, or we strive to move our bodies every single day, the same applies to our brain, in that we have to be consistently working on it, paying attention to it. And again, not to the point of it being a detriment, but to the point of saying, hey, there's a lot of potential that you have here just by learning some of these mental skills and empowering yourself with some of these mental skills. And so it's a huge emphasis of my program, is just developing these mental and emotional aspects in order to approach your life with confidence, to say, hey, I'm going to implement these nutritional strategies and move towards my goals, whatever they might be. And I'm going to make sure that I'm paying attention to my mind, my emotions, and all these things that play such a huge role in overall health. It's not just, hey, eat this and you'll lose weight. It's so much
Mhm.
more than that. It's learning how you feel about food, how you feel about your body, and making sure that as you pursue health, that it is, like we said so much more multifaceted than just here's a macro plan, here is a
Right.
eating plan. Um, I've just seen, the effect that it has had on my life personally, anecdotal experience, but in those of my clients, to see how when we approach things from all angles, that the transformation can be pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
What is a way that someone could start to understand and how to overcome, like if they have a problem with food in some way, of just even the mindset of getting themselves in control to, I don't know, see food in a good way instead of as just maybe,
Totally. Well, I mean, the first thing to examine is just to ask yourself, am I having an emotional response to this food? Meaning, this is in front of me and I really want it. I'm feeling a lot of desire for it. Or
Mhm,
I'm feeling a lot of fear about this food. A lot of people with like carbs or fats, depending on which era you grew up in, right, have a lot of emotions about different foods, fear or overwhelm or guilt or shame. And I believe that a lot of emotions as it relates to food are just not useful. I think it overlaps a great deal. We use food to socialize, to celebrate, and that can be incorporated into overall wellness. Absolutely. But when there are intense emotions that are causing you to have a poor relationship with food, sometimes we take those poor emotions like guilt or shame or fear or overwhelm or huge amounts of desire and we go to food to solve for that, right? Like I'm
mhm.
feeling guilty about eating. I'm just going to eat more, of these things that maybe I don't want to be eating.
Yeah, just
And
kinda give up and eat it anyway.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of like this screw it mentality.
Mhm,
And so what's happening in those types of situations is we're having an internal conflict and we're going external to solve for it, right? We're feeling this internal turmoil or emotional conflict. And then we're like, I'm going to go outside of me to solve for this. And again, no one blames us for doing this because this is a lot of times the culture. This is how we are taught, especially if we don't learn these types of skills of how to pay attention to our minds and our emotions and how to separate those from what we're eating. And so
mhm.
it makes sense why a lot of us do this. But when we can recognize that this internal problem requires an internal solution, then it can really change the way that we approach everything we're eating. I know that in my personal experience, before I learned a lot of these principles, I used food as a way to feel better, to control my life, to determine my worth as a person. I was good if I ate this. I was bad if I ate this. And even though the food itself was just neutral and in the world, there was so much internal conflict about it. And so now I'm eating a lot of these same foods that I was eating 10 years ago, but my relationship to it is totally different because there's not a lot of like negative emotion involved. It's just like, hey, I know what these foods do in my body, and I'm simply going to make informed decisions. And these decisions don't have any reflection on my worth as a human or on, my capabilities. It's just choices that I'm making for different reasons. And so that's why having a coach can be valuable to help you work through those to help you utilize those internal solutions to solve for that internal conflict. Um, because then it allows us to truly be free from some of those um, trying times as it comes to our health, and instead make informed decisions, still eat the foods that you enjoy, but know how to regulate yourself internally without going to something that might have a negative consequence later, right? Like if we are working to achieve certain things in our health and consistently going to things that aren't in alignment with that, then that eventually will cause negative results based on our own goals, right? And so when we can
Yeah.
learn how to solve internally, it makes a huge difference when it comes to creating sustainable health habits and really achieving the goals that we want to for ourselves.
Will you share with people how they can find you if they wanna learn more from you?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
can connect with
So
you.
you can go to my website, taylorannmacy.com. That's got a lot of information there. I'm also on Instagram at Taylor Ann Macey. I have a podcast called Brain Diet that's available on all platforms where I share all of this information. And I have a variety of different ways that people can work with me. I have my one-on-one client intensives where I take them through full-blown programs depending on their goals. I also do nutrition audits. So if you are interested in working with me but don't need like an entire program,
Mhm.
then I can take you through like a one session nutrition audit with some follow-up support and accountability just to help you get aligned with what goals you have for yourself. And I also have a 21-day autoimmune nutrition challenge that is, self-paced. You can do it whenever you want. And it allows you just to start developing some of those habits that can help you feel better and help manage that inflammation. But again, it's not a cure, as nothing really is when it comes to diet, but it's just helpful in a way of getting you to a place of implementing some of those useful habits when it comes to autoimmune conditions. So I've got a variety of ways that you can work with me. That all is on my website. And then I'm very active on Instagram. So yeah, that would be another great place to connect with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Taylor Ann, for being with me today. This has been amazing to learn, and your mindset, and just how much you probably are dealing with that we really who don't have autoimmune disease, understand. And just, I mean, even just talking about vision, my eyesight's going back, and it drives me nuts,
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a lot. So I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today and to share what you have. So thank you
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.